Okay, and speak up if you can't hear in the back when Chris starts talking, but Chris is a Ruby on Rails engineer and engineering leader with over 15 years of hands-on production experience building and modernizing complex Rails applications. He's pioneered AI-assisted Rails development, most notably using Claude and Cursor. You probably see him discuss it in the Tech Friends Slack, and uses it to build a production Rails application featuring RotaAuth, Hotwire, solid suite background processing, and then achieve 10x faster delivery while upholding enterprise standards and best practices. And like I said, he's done a lot of community work in the Ruby world. So I'm super stoked to have him talking. So take it away, Chris.
All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm gonna do full transparency on this, the way I like to do these. I'm not gonna be able to see the questions. Oh shit. It's not showing me share my screen. I gotta reboot. It's not reboot, it's like saying here. No, let me see who does it. Hey, let me see who it does. Oh, here, just give me 1 second. I have to open system settings and do it. I had Zoom on here. Give me 1 second. Amateur move. Yeah, I'll be right back.
It's the best.
Yep. I just tried to do it. Actually,
Yeah.
trying to allow something. So if you need another drink, go grab one, or whatever pizza may or may not be left. What's that?
That was interesting. We already talked about this.
We were talking about it earlier, like we want to, I was signed up and stuff, because you mentioned it on stuff, so wanted the update. Or did you say that you posted something about it, like you said you posted something about it?
Yeah, it's in the Tech Friends.
It's in Tech Friends?
Yeah, you can read about it doesn't talk about any details about Mythos and sort of like what we've done so far. I mean, beyond like the node theory, we used it to find a node theory vulnerability. But yeah, and also what's interesting, I can talk while we're waiting, is
I'm back, but it's okay. I'm listening to it too.
I
actually want to hear. I was talking to a friend about this. It's funny that you posted today because I was like, we need to have this. It would be awesome. I think I might have posted on LinkedIn. I was like, it would be awesome if GitHub scanned everything that gets like uploaded on a regular basis from like a gem. And it's kind of funny that you announced it because it's like it'd be totally badass if it just did it by default and you couldn't bump the version. You couldn't bump the version.
Token heavy, token hungry though. And the other thing that is the US government, i.e. the White House, got involved and said, you can't give out this deadly, dangerous weapon to people. And so that actually held back giving out full Mythos access for quite some time. And they're still trying to work through like non-US citizens having this access. So kind of some crazy drama that happened that delayed everything. So
yeah, I've always thought that different gem providers would just pay for it by themselves as a green stamp and put it on their gems as a priority over the people who don't pay for it. That might be an idea, and they pay for it themselves because it would give an advantage. You know, I don't know, just think out of the box. But so should you share this? You're seeing the screen, Rylan?
Yeah,
so I can share. Okay. All right, so I'm going to dive into this and let me give you a little bit of a backstory and let's see if this does it now. Please do not crash. Okay, good. Okay. So full transparency, I used AI to write this AI presentation about AI, and this is like the second time I've gone through it. I used Claude to build the entire thing, based on, and even the deck I gave Rylan was a subset of a deck that I put together for a submission to Barbecue Ruby conference that didn't get selected. So there's a combination of things here, and I like to collaborate when I talk. So feel free to stop me. I can't see your faces, so Rylan or somebody shout it out. I'm not going to be able to see the chats, but the way I like to give presentations is to have it be as collaborative as possible. So if there's something you want to talk about, I'm from Chicago. I don't care if you yell at me. Just say, hey, I'd like to get some clarification on this. For the sake of the TLDR about this presentation, it's going to talk about a project that I worked on at Goldbelly. I'm no longer at Goldbelly. So I have been interviewing, which is kind of recent history news the last 3 weeks, posted about it on LinkedIn, kind of interesting story as a structural shift. But the sake of this project was over the last 4 years there, specifically what we had charged with was organizing our APIs. We're completely disorganized. And then putting forth a platform. I'm not sure if anybody's been familiar with OpenAPI, which then led into the OpenAPI foundational elements. So I'm going to talk about where we started, where we're at, and then how it hooked up into API development along with it. And then talk a little bit about syntactic sugar around how I structure a lot of API projects, not just API projects, but even personal projects with Claude specifically to reduce hallucinations, down to pretty much zero. Like I'm shipping like anywhere, like I shipped a PR last 2 days ago, it was 125 files with accuracy in it and having prompts associated to it. So there's going to be a blend of this, going to go through a deck to talk about it. Then we'll stop for some code. I'll show you how we were actually doing some of the Claude copy and paste just to start it off. But it takes, I tried it earlier before everyone got on, we were eating all the pizza and it was taking a little bit longer. So I'm going to kind of like talk a lot about it, just show how it runs. Then we'll kind of go past it and talk about the end result. So let's kind of get into what the problem was. And again, like I'm not at the company. It's not like just, it was what it was. It was an older application, been around for 8 years. When I started this project, there was 3 different API versions and a mobile app. And the mobile app was using all the versions of the API, including non-versions, the same thing with the front ends, right? So there's really, just imagine like really not much of an organization. And so this led into where overall, a lack of documentation, some of the other stuff you could possibly imagine. But in reality, it was a lot of pain between the teams and not letting people collaborate very easily because there might be a desire for product to kind of put something on the front end in one section, but then mobile wouldn't necessarily have access to it. Or what was happening quite a bit was, mobile was really going down a lot. Like we would make a change in the back end and the mobile would just bust and no one would know about it until like a customer reported it or it bubbled up into one of the error log systems, which is actually, never where you want it to be. And so this led into a series of discussions to try to figure out how to solve this. Originally, it was proposed in this technology called API Builder, which I'm not sure if anybody, I can't see the hands if anybody's ever seen this product, but it was basically built, a lot of the Java community use it. There's a small subset of the community. And my VP of engineering at the time, we had this long debate. He presented it to me and I was like, it's like, I really don't think we should do it this way. And I'm having this meeting with him back and forth, and I presented OpenAPI, which OpenAPI ended up solving. The thought process at the time was I had used, has anybody used, and again, I can't see anybody's face. Is anybody familiar with like OpenAPI and specifically JSON schema? Has anybody used any of that before?
Yes.
Okay, so if you've been through that transition, remember JSON schema was first, and then OpenAPI kind of adopted it, which was actually pretty wild, right? And you can use it for a lot of things. So what I'm primarily focusing on is just requests and specifically request specs on the back end, but you do all your defining on the front end. Now, the goal of this project was not only to get the contracts, so to be clear about that, this was before, I'm looking at I'm talking like Sonnet days, right? It was like Wild Wild West shit in the AI stuff. So like, you know what I mean? Like sort of like, but people joke about hallucinations and it's actually really hallucinating. Now it's not really hallucinating as much if you have the right setup by far, especially on Opus 4.8. I mean, building this thing towards the end of we're already kind of in production, but kind of get past this point. Like I was spending $1,000 a month of my own money, like shipping on Claude on a regular basis. Now I didn't even ask the company for any money the entire last 3 years. I was just paying for it to move as fast as we could. And I was using it outside as well. So the first step was trying to find a way to organize all these versions, which I'm kind of highlighting. And we came up with what was called V4. V4 became like the baseline, which typically most organizations would be V1. But what we did was starting at that point, we were then able to start defining things from like an API first perspective. What this means is the long-term goal was you do not have to go to the engineers to design an API, or at least with the front end or mobile, what anybody might use. You could use the technology to develop it and build what the contract would be, and then use all the tooling around it to interact with fake data, stubs, mocks, everything else before we ever built the backend. And in many cases, we never even built the backend. We would kill it in the idea phase because it didn't make sense. And that's what this allowed us to do. The key part about this is if you've had experience with JSON schema and you kind of bubbled into OpenAPI, you know how the shapes, and they're just raw JSON. And there's a definition. I'm going to show a few examples here. There's basic sets of definitions that define contracts. Ruby, it's you can put anything into it, but it gives you the ability to kind of define the types, not quite like TypeScript. But beyond that piece of defining what the shape of the JSON and the API would be, it really defines, locks that API layer. A huge win of OpenAPI, which I'm not going to get into detail here, just not enough time, is that there's a lot of tools around it in every language to auto-generate things. And so what that means is like we could API first define a contract, and our front end had a client library that just fit up the OpenAPI with one click of a button. The Ruby side had it as well. Python had it as well. The mobile app had it as well. So no one necessarily had to build the client layer. All they had to do was focus on the contract following SemVer, right? So stop me if there's any questions on the SemVer piece or APIs. I'm kind of blowing through those as an assumption. But OpenAPI pairs with SemVer, and that's how we're rolling everything out. Now, In our case, V4 to kind of consume all these older versions I've been mentioning, that took well over a year, and we just kept everything in V4. Matter of fact, one of my points that I put out was I didn't want to ever do a breaking change. I wanted this hard line in the sand because we'd had so many breaking changes that I knew that once the AI tooling was starting to use, like I knew that this was going to start becoming faster and faster. I was just kind of getting everything in the contracts that we possibly can first. This is what it looks like from a synopsis. And again, like these files, and I can't go into nauseum and in depth on each of this for the sake of a half hour. I can't, don't have enough time. But you think about it, like they produce giant JSON files. And if anybody, like, let me, if you have questions on this, but these definitions live in a series of just one giant JSON. But what we did, we had a centralized code repository that we put the API documents in. So I'm showing this, it could live in Rails projects. You could put it in your Rails projects right now. You don't have to do the secondary server. That is a little bit more robust. You don't have to go that approach. But we had multiple services. We had a front end using it that had to hook up to it. We had the backend hook up to it. We had another microservice that was using ingestion, and then you had mobile. So if you don't really have that configuration, what you're seeing here in this example, I'm going to kind of talk to once I get into Claude, is all just done of a local Rails API, right? And I like it, and I still use it in my personal projects because I use it to define the shapes of the request objects. And actually, over time, those contracts help, and AI eats it up. Like you could point AI, right? Like, and I'm going to talk about this when I get into the Claude section, but you could go directly into these files and it'll start reading this, like stuff like this. And I'm going to talk, I start out with a specific example. And when I'm joking about it at the beginning, I'm actually not joking that I had Claude put this together. The first thing I said to do was like create an orders object and simulate it and do the whole thing. And it did the whole thing in Fables. This is off of a Fable 5, right? So all the latest stuff. I don't really count how many tokens I used. I didn't care, but like kind of put the whole thing together to show the example. And this is a very grossly simplified example of what JSON API could be. The example that we were running had close to, this is one of the downsides of it, is that on a larger API, I mean, I think it was up to maybe 25,000 lines on a single file. So when it uncompacted, like, so you see how these has these like components that link, a deep link. That schema definitions could, if you especially have experience with JSON schema and OpenAPI, you can ref things. So you can have a file that like refs out to certain directories and all this stuff. So it makes it small. But when Rails needs it and when you're doing the contracts, it uncompacts it and makes it a giant file. So like our definition file was almost close to almost like 4 megabyte, 5 megabyte JSON file. And if you ever open up one of those in an editor, you pretty much can only open in VS Code. So it was, or like a terminal, it was pretty large. What you're seeing now is the other side of this. So you have the JSON file that you build and put together. That's where the schema defines. That's the open schema spec. So that's a worldwide spec. It's not something I created by myself. It's been around online for quite some time. I recommended it to the organization and ended up winning out over OpenAPI Builder because there's just a lot of tooling around it. There's a lot of tooling that's free, and we all like free. But especially as terms like building the clients and operating within the client technologies and getting all that stuff in any language, it's just seamless one-click installs. And I spent a lot of time auditing it to see what it's like. And I also knew in the back of my mind that like if we want to do stuff from like just the JSON schema perspective, and I know some people raised their hand and said they had experience with it. You have that baked in now for free. I will say before I get into community, there is one downside. Anybody goes down this road, and it's still a downside. Is there was and everyone knows about SemVer. They introduced a pretty major breaking change in like a patch in a minor release. So like a lot of the stuff in the Rails community or Ruby community is tied to 3.0. I think it's like 3.06 because they introduced this crazy shift in 3.1, which should have been a 4 release, and it's like broke a lot of things. At the time, once I get into the Claude stuff, we were thinking about throwing Claude at it just to see if it could actually fix a lot of the challenges that the open source community was having. But we didn't approach it. So the committee side of this is, and stop me if I can't see questions on this, but the committee side is the R spec side. So what committee allows you to do then is there's a shared directory that you put these schemas in, the uncompacted schemas, and you get helpers. So what you're seeing on the screen is like this is kind of a little bit of a double. You didn't need Claude wrote this way, but like you don't have to do it this way. But yeah, there's expect response. You have this, using the convention you see in R spec to get the created. The fancy way is the 201 underneath it. So there's 2 of these. They're going to pile up. You're going to go in and you see these down here where you have a schema confirm and you have schema confirm with the status code. What it actually does is you could define the inputs, like whatever the parameters going in, and also the outputs and the actual response. So when you think about request specs, I really, really love using this library in and outside of APIs because I really, really, once I used it, had to unlearn. I'm sure everyone's familiar with it, where you write these gigantic expect assertions that, like in the old school way, it was like, I expect this hash to have this, or you would do like hash including, and you would do like this, and you have these gigantic like hashes to compare. This is one line of code. Like it's just one assert. And so you could use committee and OpenAPI outside of some of this stuff. And you could use it in a lot of different ways, is what I wanted to highlight, but it simplifies that significantly. So you can, and it does other things too. So a lot of people, a lot of times when you write those specs, you're not actually testing, like you might have other different variations, like you expect it to be a string or enum. It can only have these three values, but if you don't do all those expectations inside of it, you could have gaps. And this solves a lot of that pretty much out of the gate. And so it really, really helped with not just provide reassurance to our front end engineers as well as the mobile side that there was stability, that stuff wasn't changing. It really just locked everything. So we followed SemVer strictly. Before this, there really wasn't really a way to do it very effectively. Now, these things, there are two ways to look at them. You could do them in YAML. We did it in JSON. I like JSON. I preferred it. It's kind of odd. I think people in I don't know. I'd be interested in what everyone thinks here. I mean, there's pros and cons to either approach. Being that I knew that the files were going to be like gigantic, like at length. Not to say I am actually counting. And so like you're going to see here, like this one actually concatenated it where it put the swirly brackets like next to one another. Ours actually were on single lines according to our linter. So it made that even larger than this would be able to display on the screen. So when I was saying it was like 5 megabytes, we probably would have chopped it down with some of the YAML. But I think that being that it was entirely front end, it just felt right to me to keep everything in JSON, and everybody on the front end really loved it. Like the front end engineers that really didn't interface with Ruby as much really loved it because just raw JSON, and then everything on the type side and the JavaScript client generator really loved it there too. So I kind of kept that all going, but this year here nor there. So I mean, you could kind of do it either way, but just kind of highlighting it, an example. Now, this is what I want to show. And again, I'm going to try to run it, but this is how simple this is. So what you saw on the other slide was an example of like what the API inventory, we define this. So imagine that someone came to you on your team and it was a product came in and said, hey, we need to build the inventory API. And we want to design that API without ever doing any of the backend. We want to kind of get a shape of which we want to publish it first before we ever do any of the backend code. And we want to keep that team, or maybe let's say you're doing the whole thing yourself. Doesn't matter. You're a team of 1 or a team of 5. It doesn't start changing the system down the road, and you do all, like, it's putting all, like I'd say, like the way I like to say is like putting the horse way ahead of the cart, right? So like puts all that stuff up front. And so once you have the definition, then you could literally, and I'm just going to show that this is, I didn't use PB copy, I literally just copy and paste, but for the sake of this example, and I do have a Claude example of this, I'm going to go in and let me know if this does translate. So I built this whole thing with like an example app just to put this together, just to show how easy this was at the time. And I literally did this. I'm actually not afraid to say it now because it's kind of funny. But back then I'd have to I was doing like 8 or 9 of these a day. And then I was literally just doing PB copy and or copying over. And I would literally just say, I need you to build this, my guy. And that's all that I would do. Now, this is going to take a minute because obviously on my laptop on a Wi-Fi connection, I'm sharing the screen. But I was always say be nice to AI because then you don't know if it's going to kill you later on when Skynet becomes activated. So
you didn't say please.
I didn't say please. Yeah. But I wasn't I didn't start swearing at it. You're like, oh my God, if you do swear at it from time to time, it does respond more effectively. It says, hey, I'll think about it extra harder. I'll go longer. But the point I was trying to highlight is like this thing. So in the app that I put together as an example, I put together the order. I did all that stuff out the door, right? And imagine that you have an 8-year Rails app. Our application was large. I mean, I would say our specs were solid. We had great specs. We had great structures. There's great patterns in place. So it wasn't, we've all been parts of apps that are like kind of shit shows all over the place. This was not the case. We did have really good patterns in place in different parts of the stack. So this allowed, and we also had, I'm going to highlight a bit of this in a second. I'm not going to wait for this whole thing to run. But what I want to demonstrate here is it's being the contracts coming into Claude. It's it knows it's the way that I would articulate it. It's like it's natural language, so it picks it up really, really well. And it's going to create. If I waited, it's going to create like it's reading all my Claude MVs. I'm going to talk about this in a second, the next couple slides, but how I set projects in terms of Claude. But it ended up reading that it'll build the models, it'll build the specs, it just does the whole thing in one prompt, and then you just review it. That's how I'd review it at the end. And that's how I shipped. Like I didn't mean for this to happen. I loved it so much. I was just spending like a lot of extra hours a night building and schema defining all the APIs before they were even needed. Like I was building them all out. So then the mobile team could switch over and just have it ready to go. And then we could have all the organization. Now I'm not going to highlight this. I don't have the time, but we did also like organize. I did restructure the directories. So for those of us who spend a lot of API time in APIs, I did hard code like a V4 route, and it was a V4 path and then V4 isolation. I'm not going to get into covering that, but it's worth highlighting. That helps AI in this case. So when it's doing that, reading this, it has a path folder, right? So it's not like you may have been in other APIs that share a lot of inheritance and stuff, or like they do like maybe there's a control directory that gets imported all of them. And I didn't take that approach. I took the approach where it's like V4 all the way isolated, or V3 or V5 all the way isolated. And I had a rake task that would create the version, copy all the stuff, and then use parent-child inheritance. But that way we could just delete things in full isolation or override things using metaprogramming, and then AI would just do that. So now, I mean, basically, I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to go through this whole prompt. It is worth noting that like my Claude file, and I could show you this, you maybe see it at the end, like I approve everything. So like I have this little helper called csync, which actually csyncs any directory I open up and checked on the code repository. I csync it into a central directory that uses Chesmoy, links it all together. And so I know whatever Claude might change something, I can review it and revert it. But and then I have it audit what its approval on, so I know what it's doing, and then I blacklist certain directories that are like basically deny lists, like that it can't get into. Other than that, like the reason why you're seeing here, especially in Fable 5 or Opus 4.8, it really started after 4.1. Like I mean, I get prompts I had a couple prompts this week lasting 2 hours, never even asked me what to do, like until the end. So like I just let it run, and now. I can't show this on this laptop, but like I run a iMac Pro, and I'm on average on that one running 10 of these active stations at the same time without a problem. Similar principle, but in isolation. So that's something that we'll highlight in a second. I am going to go switch back to the slides. So this thing's going to run forever. Let's see. So that's just kind of like copy paste. So again, like building that out as rapidly as we could, this allowed us to manage breaking changes, at least get everything into V4. We did not. I took a pretty strong stance on let's get everything in before we start mutating anything. And then we had like an open list of Notion to kind of be able to say, hey, we want to do this for the future, but let's not worry about it right now. The main goal of this, and I'm sure people are dealing with this in their projects, is like get everything into a great state that you can build upon first. And I like to say now that like the day of the MVP is gone, and I really believe that, like especially with Claude and some of the stuff I'm going to highlight, like it's going to get to the point you don't necessarily need. You just I would totally recommend just doing the whole damn thing and just shipping it and then kind of iterating past it, because you don't necessarily have to wait. You can just chop up the PRs organically, right? So taking this a step further, so what you saw was an example of like the human would design the schema definition. You could also just use Claude to design, and I'm not going to get into an example of this, but you could just use Claude to design the schema definition as well. And once you have enough of them in a directory, you just built your context. So it would know the pattern. So in our organization, and I didn't have time to get through all these little details in it, but we had like shared air objects, we had shared directories, and we could spin it into the directory, and there was a Claude file in it that basically knew like, hey, I'm operating within our central API. I know what these rules are of this API, but this other directory has a different API. It would operate differently, and I could switch between the two relatively easily. And so we just ended up creating some of the schemas directly from Claude from the jump, instead of actually writing them by hand. But it gave people the flexibility if you wanted to or not. You don't necessarily have to do it that way. That's just the way it was done. Now I'm going to get a little more into Claude right now and how I structure things, how I recommend structuring things. And it's something I've been doing both inside, like I said, I recently have shifted. I'm not at Goldbelly anymore, but like I am interviewing, which is kind of funny. But about this principle, I also build a lot of stuff outside the office, and I've been working on a pretty extensive application for quite some time, about 9 months, helping a friend of mine out. And I get really OCD about how I set up Claude files. And what you saw, another example, if you caught it, if you go back, like it was reading all the Claude MDs in different directories, that's how I put many Claude MDs in many directories in an app. As a matter of fact, to build this example that you're seeing, it kind of highlighted the pattern. But in my other Rails app, it's a very extensive Rails app. I mean, we built it. I used it to like put up. It's storing PII SSN numbers. It's like storing them to encrypted it with AWS, doing all these different structures. And there's very, very specific Claude files in every little directory. So I mean, like I have one in the models and the services and the controllers, and then I have a central Claude file, which I refer to as brain files. On this, you might see that reference in here inside of this presentation, but they kind of cascade. So they're like a pyramid. And so what this allows you to do is it allows deep linking in the files, right? So I could do a single prompt. And if I say something like I did that inventory, right? I pasted, I'm not going to go back to it because it's still running, but I had this project set up, and even at GoBelly, if this whole thing set up, I could copy that in to a directory. And as it's running, it's going to pick up all the other Claude prompts as it enters that directory, as it's part of its lifespan, as it's going through understanding what to do, pick up the rules it needs to do. And this is more efficient than it is to have one gigantic Claude file that tells you do this and this or this if you're in this. Like it just doesn't work as well as it says like this is what I would love you to do from an overarching perspective. But if my prompt takes me into the model directory, the model directory might say, here's a good example, like model ties to database, right? Your database Claude file most likely will say something like check for indexes, have some sort of performance constructs on it. Like, if you're using this, if you're going to create an enum, use a Postgres enum data type, like something that's not a linter, right? And I'm going to highlight this a little bit, but if anybody has questions on this piece, please stop me now. This is one of this feature.
Stop. Wait, so I agree with like the non-monolithic Claude file. One of the things, and I've had it kind of ignoring stuff. Like my original approach, and this is months ago, based on like blog posts that I've read, is like I have Claude MD, and then I reference other things in there that are my like docs agents directory. Like, is that still a good approach? Because I've seen what you're talking about. I don't versus like having Claude MD contextually in other directories. I don't know if one's better than the other.
So you could, I think it is. It's what I'm advocating for. I mean, so I find here's a better way to put this, right? So I know that everyone's like a team of one, and you could have a siloed approach where you have your own preferred way of handling things inside the combination of the agents and Claude files. I could tell you, like from a team perspective, the more context, and I'm going to get into this, is I really want to distinguish a line in the sand between what should be a linter and what should be in the Claude file. They're very, very different, right? So linters are, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a minute, but linters is like, I want underscore prefixes, or I want like spaces in parentheses, or I want like single quotes or double quotes. Like, don't ever put that shit in the Claude file, ever. Like, ever. It doesn't belong in it. A lot of people do it. I've seen it. I take it out. It belongs in a linter. And it matters. We were really great about this. And it matters so much as to like create a linter. If it doesn't exist, create one. That's a set of rules. Put it into a hook or put it into something that should run before Claude hits it. And you don't need to like spend tokens on it. You also don't need to have to worry about some hallucinations with it because it doesn't make any sense, right? So that's for the linter rules. Now, the Claude, I set up this specifically, and I've been doing this now for a few years, is I find that over time, and I actually going to show some code on this. If your application has some very defined patterns for doing things, like I spent a lot, I think it's actually coming up. Well, I could show it in a second. I get really specific on like service objects, following like a Sandy Metz pattern. And the first ones in these applications I built by hand, like a surgeon would use with a scalpel, right? I put the pattern in place. And nowadays with 4.8, you could probably write the pattern first, evaluate it, really look at that PR from a granular perspective. But then since this is inception, I've been building it now, it has every single service annotated, and the hallucinations, like it's like 0.001% because of those little files. Because each of the little directories, as it opens up things, knows specifically exactly what it needs to do, and that specific container. The way and the last thing I'll say on this, and there's a lot of difference of opinions on this, is I remember when I was I was coming back from college years ago, and I was working on an assembly line, putting up like literally packing phones in Motorola, and there was 8 people on the assembly line. You can imagine how like challenging this is to be. Total first world problem, but it's very, very challenging. And you put a battery in the box for 4 hours. I'm not even kidding you. And I look at it like this, can fast forward to this state, because like all that Claude needs to know how to do is put that one battery in a box. The one next to it knows to put the lid on the box. The next to it, put the sticker on the box or something like that. And it gets really good at that once, but highly specificity. And then the other one on top of it would say, hey, like I know how to do all these things by pointing you, like you said, that setup pointing you to the right place. taking that one step further, and I'm gonna keep going, is you could also link outside of the repo, right? So you could put something in one of those directories and say, hey, like we might have this other thing in another docs directory. I need you to interpret all of it, and you could deep link when it needs it. That's what I found. So I like this approach because I don't want to have to type and in my prompts. I just want to type do this and tell me what it is, like in plan mode, and then have enough knowledge and context around doing that thing and responding back to me and iterating on the plan. And that's gotten faster and faster along the way. I actually talked about this. I'm going to go through this, but like this is the linters piece. Again, we kind of cover this in the last slide. And thank you for that question, but it's like, don't put the linters in the Claude files. It's not really for that. You might put some of your core patterns in there, the services or something, but not like what a linter should be. So we kind of already talked about this one. Yeah, so like this is, let's see. Yeah, so let's see if it actually came back. I don't think, yeah, see, it's not going to finish. I didn't think it would. I put that slide in there if it would, and I didn't want to take up too much time for it waiting. I didn't think it was going to. Mainly because this is an example project. On the other projects, they probably, yeah, see now it's doing it. And I just basically allow all to get it. I will allow all edits anyway, and it'll come back and finish it. But that's what I'm not going to wait for it. That's what that slide would have done. Then you could take, again to this, you don't have to take all of this to your projects. I think that like we put this in to, and I wouldn't even call it a legacy app. It was an app that's been around for a while that we adapted in. I mean, it's not something that you need a greenfield project to do so. I will tell you, like, if I'm hooking into an API and there's even one API or smaller APIs inside of an existing project, I'm using it because it helps me save a lot of time defining the request specs if I want to do it. But on larger projects for APIs and keeping things organized, like I have yet to find a better way to really push this out. And the Claude components with it just make it even insanely faster, insanely fast to just keep shipping it. And I should add, and this thing is going to take, like I said, it's still running, but you'll get. It's not just that you got to think past just the contract. These become feature complete. Like you're seeing it right now. Like it's doing the whole model. It'll do the whole thing. Like in this example I put together, there was no inventory model, and I didn't tell it to create the inventory model. I didn't tell it to create the controller. I didn't tell it to do any of that stuff. It would know how to do all of that just based on the contract alone. Like, and you saw me, like I could put whatever the hell I wanted in front of the prompt. You could just put say do this, and it would do it. Because it has all that constructs based into OpenAPI. And if it doesn't know it, it's going to go out and interpret OpenAPI. There's a lot of documentation on that platform, so it knows it right out of the jump. That's it. So it's kind of funny. It's the Claude stuff. I could talk about that setup. I know there's one question about that a little bit ad nauseum about it, and I could stop sharing about this if there's any questions on that front, but. I have a lot of opinions on that setup. I get into a lot of debates with my friends about that, how everyone's doing things slightly differently in different silos on that stuff. But as far as I've seen in between, especially after 4.1, the better those files have been tuned, the less hallucinations there were. And it also costs less. So if you're managing tokens, I don't really, tokens to me has always felt like slot play in the casino. Now that we're talking about Ruby conference in the casino, like it's always felt like slot play. I'm like, I don't know how to equate it. If you're going outside of the repo using MCPs or something, it's going to rack it up. It's going to go really, really fast in what you're using. And it's going to take a little bit longer versus something that's closer to the metal. Native has always seemed to operate faster for me in the setups that I've been shipping. And then also the team that's on side of it using those things, everyone has that shared approach. So we had a pattern repo that we could put stuff up to look at. We would have PRs into it to discuss this. And then once it got merged, everybody got it. So it was a win instead of saying, hey, like, pull this new Notion document or pull this other thing from a different product. It was just baked into their tool, the next prompt they ran. And that seemed to have some great results across the team in that shared perspective, which it's a lot of fun that way, I think. So that's a little bit it. That's all that I got today. Any other questions?
Chris, are you familiar with TypeSpec? Did you look at TypeSpec at all?
I have not with this, no.
Okay. Because like that, your approach is kind of similar to what I'm doing. Like we had an open API that was managed by hand, and I was able to take it and move it into TypeSpec, and now everything originates from TypeSpec. Claude knows how to write TypeSpec and generates all my open API, and I'm generating my clients from that.
Yeah, I'd love to check that out. I mean, at the time, so I mean, full transparency, this project
Yeah.
started like three years ago.
It
So
wasn't even
it
close
wasn't
to
even
1.0.
what wasn't even a thing. And when I started doing, I mean, when I started doing this stuff with Claude, it was a shit show. Like it was kind of a shit show. So like, especially in the early days, like Sonnet really wasn't great. I mean, like you'd get some way the way there, but I remember being like, I mean, I remember when 4.1 hit and I spent $1,000 that 1 month, and I was like, and then it started really hitting. And then like at 4.5, and I was like, oh man, we are done. Like Skynet's coming. Like it was just like it was really good. It was, it asked like 2 questions and shipped the whole contract without a problem. And so I think now I would, if I were to do this right now today, yeah, that's something I would check out in some of the more automated fashion. But I think regardless of what you choose to use, the key there is that if you have a pattern that it could hook into and it's done it more than once, it's gonna do it very, very well, no matter what the pattern. It's getting better and better at that case.
I mean, in hindsight, like I was like, I didn't really start using LLMs until late 2025, when I feel like things, for at least for me, became like something that could really produce like a lot of good stuff. So I was in the type spec stuff earlier, but like now I wonder like how much value, like, because I have to work around some things, but like, is this approach still valuable in an LLM world, or would your approach just be better and just ignore this other tool to transpile? I don't know.
I mean, I still think, I mean, as far as contract testing goes, whether you use I'd have to look at the product you're mentioning. I think if it generates the OpenAPI, I think that's a huge win, because I think of things if it's a team of one, I mean, you could obviously choose what you want, or smaller teams, right? Choose whatever is most efficient. But if you have a multi-tier organization where there's front end separated, decoupled from the back end, I think that the JSON, that's why I opted for JSON versus like the YAML, a lot of Rubyist like YAML, but JSON is really kind of uniform. And OpenAPI has so much stuff with it. That's why I picked it back then. Was there was so like, I remember evaluating for the front end team even before I presented it to the front end team. I was like, you've got 8 clients to pick from. You just have to pick one. So like, there's like 8 free clients off the shelf. Just pick the one that we really like. And there's like 5 of them in mobile. There's one for Swift. And so I would be, if I was picking something today, that would be also part of the equation, was evaluating what open source tools came with it for free. Versus what I'd have to build myself. Although building stuff yourself now is easy too. So it's a kind of a trade-off what people want to do. Yeah. Yep.
So this is a good talk on the application of contracts to backend code, to APIs, backend applications.
Yeah.
That's great. But our consumers aren't all API consumers. Like, what have you looked into this kind of approach of establishing contracts beyond backend?
Yeah, we did. So the next iteration we took it, and this is kind of interesting. Again, it's backend, but I mean, you could use this. The reason why I'm trying to answer your question, you could do this you can apply the contract for pretty much anything. And so what I mean by that is, you got to stop moving, dude. I'm gonna get sick over here. Trying to see his face, and you're like moving around like it's a roller coaster. Okay, so like, I'm giving you shit. But we had another system in our event system, in the Kafka pipeline, right? And we wanted to find a way that you didn't have a request object that came in, and we had to define it against a contract. And so think about it, as to your point, you could define anything you really want off against the OpenAPI contract. It's just schema at the end of the day, schema definition. So we were actually just at that point, like if you want to hook up from the front of something else on the front end, or inbound and outbound events, that was the next iteration we took it. And I built a whole section where it's like, it was just definitions. And then once you get to the definition level, you could use it for anything. Whereas if on the committee side, like what you saw at the beginning, was tightly coupled to that backend request object, this other side was we could tie it to anything we wanted. There was really no requirement. So I get to expand more what you're defining it specifically for, but you could use it, because then it's just a set of rules. It's just comparison.
What I think you're getting at is that, like, if you have a proper contract, the implementation actually just doesn't matter.
Yeah, true. Yes, I agree. Yeah, I totally agree.
I think it's highlighting things we've noticed in software engineering all along, which is that, like, the less you can establish a contract, the lower your quality is going to be. Like, the more painful every aspect is going to be.
Yes.
It just makes me think about, like, what other things are missing contractability.
It's great. It's a great point. It's a great point. Because the more you can make a contract for, the faster the LLM is going to go, by far. Like that, and I tested that. I mean, I could say this with a lot of experience in the last 2 years doing this. Like it just got faster and faster as the contracts got better. So to your point, the more you can put a construct around a thing, and it can even be CSS, right? If you had a way, or like whatever it is on your contract, you have some set of rules. You could interpret the rules against another set of rules, and it's gonna just eat that alive.
How it would handle Cucumber, for example. Like I don't think Cucumber is necessarily aged. It was never great, and I don't think it's aged well. But I mean, if there is, I would be curious if there's anything better at this point for BDD. Like I'd be curious. Like this is something I've been kind of struggling in some purely vibe coded stuff I'm working on. Is that like what validation paradigm do you even care about? Like I don't even care about the code. So if you don't care about the back, I don't even care about the backend API. Like you're talking about something like I don't even know if that really matters anymore in certain applications. Like I think what matters more is the actual contracts you have with the customer, and the customer.
But they should, in an agentic system, I would expect that contract with the customer would cascade down automatically to a contract of some kind on the back end at some point. You might not be the one writing it, but it's going to be the one writing it, just as part of the flow. And so I don't think you're going to see those be entirely eliminated. Like there's a theoretical model right now I was having in conversations this week where if you think about it, and just an organization like Transparent, the startup I was talking to potentially joining the company, was like you could envision a system where a bug comes in, whether it's Rollbar or Sentry, whatever, it gets completely ingested. And I think companies are starting to evaluate these in phases where at first, you get comfortability with like, oh, it generated the PR. Okay, the humans are going to the PR, but I think that's not even close to the end game. It should generate the PR, evaluate the PR against a set of rules against efficacy, like a drug would do. Like I'm going to get you at like 95% against your rules, no linter issues or the basics. Have it evaluate the Claude prompt on it, maybe use CoderRabbit AI, fix all of that stuff. Then it should be able to ship it to production, monitor the logs, and see if it's fixed. If it wasn't fixed, revert it back and then do it again until it's done. That is completely entirely doable right now without human intervention whatsoever. Like it's not hard to build that system either. It's not. So like Sentry has outbound hooks, like there's ways to do this and it just ingests it and does it. Now becomes organizational comfortability with that, right? Like how much you want to give it the power to do the merging into production. But I think we're going to be quickly in the next like 6 months, or at least different organizations will be at this point where they'll do what like Slack and other organizations does, where you're in progressive rollouts and they'll roll out the fix progressively and they'll check the logs and then roll it back. And the entire system will be completely automated. I mean, the last thing I'd say to your point is I think, and I've said this now in multiple talks outside of this and just different mentoring sessions and stuff, even with my mentor, I don't think software engineer, I think the title of software in front of engineer is dead. I think it's product engineer. And I think that's the current title. I think that what's going to transition in the next 6 months to a year, not all software engineers are going to make it to product engineer. That's a reality we're living in. Product engineers are going to be dealt with a lot more from the customer perspective. Like, do you like to talk to clients? No, you might not get the job, right? Like, do you understand how to build all the front end components? Like, can you do all of this stuff from a prompting perspective, right? There's going to start asking some of those questions. And those are, especially if anybody in here uses like Turbo Hotwire paradigm and like the modern Rails app, and you're shipping the entire thing on the Rails app, especially with Tailwind or like Bootstrap, if you still want to use Bootstrap, like it is nearly flawless in Opus 4.8. And you can do entire feature sets of it without like breaking out the component. It does it all. And so like that's completely different than it was like last year at this time. Completely different. And it's, yeah. So I'm expanding what you're saying, Joel.
So I can project your company's code base via Sentry now.
Yes.
As long as I put it in the payload. That
Yeah. I mean, you gotta have this. I'm like grossly simplifying it, but it works. It does work. Yeah. I mean, obviously, GitHub's different, right? There's different companies, different scale that do different things. It's like I don't know what the raw answer to that is, but your point that you made about like at some point who's writing that contract and how that cascades, I think that's getting higher and higher up the chain. Right. Like I was having conversations in my previous employer with designers and hooking in like the Claude web version and how it hooks back up to the code repository to get access to the design library. Right. A year ago, that was not possible. Now I literally set up the Claude web and said, hey, hook up the repo into it and make it design components on the web that could actually entirely make it back to the system without ever writing the PR. So like that was entirely done just by those hooks. And you couldn't do that a year ago. So your question is, it's a very good derivative question, because I think that like the contract is written somewhere. Where that ultimately ends up getting written, I don't know how far that will keep going, but it's been exciting to see how far it will go.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I love that shit, man. It's good. That's good. That was a good one. I mean, I think people are scared about it at the end of the day. You don't know, but I think that like it's I think it's I don't know. The way I do this now, I know I've been like one of the hot louder ones in the room. Like to me, I feel like I'm playing World of Warcraft again. And I get a lot of fun. I get a lot of fun out of doing this. Which anybody that played that game and anybody who tried to like script their characters, especially the older MMORPGs, that was a pain in the ass. I think most of the game's probably bots now and NPCs running around. So like it's probably not even real humans playing the game anymore. You're just watching the other robot attack the other robot. So like it's just like so. But thank you for everyone. Hope everyone enjoyed it. So
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you,
Chris.
Chris.
yeah, always.